Okay, now we're going to talk about party systems. A party system, also known as a party era, is a distinct period of voter behavior. And during this time period, you see voters and voting for predominantly one party or the other. This is caused by the coalitions of each party have been solidified, and they'll continue to vote in that pattern. Party systems end with what's called a critical election. More on that in another slide. And then new coalitions basically reform, and we see a new pattern of voter behavior emerge. The first party system was between the Jeffersonian Democrats and the Federalists. The second party system was between the Jacksonian Democrats and the Whigs. The third party system was the Democratic Party versus the Republicans. The Republican Party was the last third party to successfully capture the president. This is because the Whigs split up over the issue of slavery and allow the remnants of the Whig Party with some Free Soilers and some other minor parties to form the modern Republican Party. Party System 4, the hallmark of System 3 is going to be close competition. And what is meant by that is that neither party is able to dominate the presidency and Congress for any great length of time. Now, when I say close competition, I don't necessarily mean divided government. I do not mean presidents of one party and Congresses of another party. I mean one party controls Capitol Hill and the White House, and then after a couple of elections, another party dominates Capitol Hill and the White House. Party System 4, again, Democrats and Republicans, and this will be the case throughout the rest of the party systems, takes place from 1896 to 1932. During this time period, the Republicans dominate the political landscape with minor exception, for example, the election of Wilson. Party System number 5 is going to be Democrats versus Republicans again, and this is going to be the time period of Democratic dominance. So this will be the time period from the New Deal up to the turmoil of the 1960s, where it comes to solidifies or comes to a head in 1968. And the 1968 convention for the Democratic Party was rather tumultuous, and that's when you see some of the fault lines in the Democratic Party begin to really emerge, and you see large numbers of Democrats begin to leave. This was somewhat predicated based upon the Civil Rights Act of 1964, where Southern whites who had been part of the Democratic coalition begin to leave over the issue of racial integration. System 6, 1968 to whenever it ends. And during this time period, the closest thing we have to a hallmark or a continued pattern of voter behavior is divided government. Now, divided government is almost impossible unless voters engage in a specific type of behavior called split-ticket voting. During split-ticket voting, a voter will vote for candidates of either party. It was not really until post-World War II America that voters regularly engaged in split-ticket voting. Prior to that time period, for a variety of reasons, voters were more likely to vote a straight ticket, meaning that they would vote for all Democrats or all Republicans. With the increasing de-alignment of the electorate, voters are far more likely to split the ticket, which more often than not has resulted in divided government. As previously mentioned, there are different elections that mark the beginning and end of these party systems or party eras. Most political scientists refer to these elections as critical elections. This is whenever you see the end of one system and the emergence of another, although other vocabulary can be used. For example, the last election of a system could be called a de-aligning election, and that's when the coalitions that make up each party begin to fall apart. The de-aligning election is followed by a realigning election, where the new coalition that makes up, or the new coalitions that make up each party emerge. You can have what's called a deviating election whenever an election doesn't fit the pattern. For example, I stated before the election of Wilson during the time period of Republican dominance was a deviating election. Also, the election of Eisenhower during the time period of Democratic dominance is a deviating election. After deviating election, you can have what's called a reinstating election, which puts the party system back on track. And then if an election fits the system, it is called a maintaining election. Perhaps the most important concept, though, or the most important terms are going to be critical elections, which mark the change, or if you want to be more precise, de-aligning election is the last election in the system, which is followed by the realigning election. The primary function of political parties in the United States political system is to win elections, and this is done through the nomination of candidates. A candidate is nominated, or a nomination of a candidate is a way of a party saying, this is the person we think everyone ought to vote for. The nomination process at the national level is handled at a convention. The National Convention of both parties is tasked with the function of nominating a candidate for president and for vice president. In older times, what would happen is you would have state conventions or county conventions, and in a similar fashion, delegates to a state convention would nominate a candidate for governor, perhaps U.S. senator, and so forth. There would also perhaps be local caucuses that would nominate someone for a local office. During the progressive period of American history, the convention method of nomination is replaced by what is called the direct primary, or simply primary. And it's with this mechanism that the members of the party and the electorate, and that is to say the average voter who happens to be a member of that political party, is allowed to select his party's nominee for office. There are different types of direct primary. One is called a closed primary. In a closed primary, only members of that political party can participate. So to participate in the Republican primary, you must declare that you are a member of the Republican Party at the time of voter registration, and then you will be only permitted to vote in the Republican primary. During the general election, which is the election to decide who ultimately wins, you could obviously vote for Republican candidates or Democratic candidates, but for purposes of the nomination process, you can only participate in the Republican primary, or conversely, the Democratic primary if you happen to be registered as a Democrat. In a closed primary system, typically independents are not allowed to participate in either party's primary. So in a closed primary state, it's typically not a good idea to decide that you're an independent, because in effect what you're doing is you're depriving yourself of the opportunity to participate in part of the decision-making process. Some states have what is known as an open primary. In an open primary, you do not declare your party affiliation at the time of registration. Rather, on election day, which you would have previously registered for, you're given the choice of participating in the Democratic or Republican primary. So in a closed primary, the decision Democrat or Republican is made during the time of registration, which could be changed in the future. But during the time of registration, you decide Democrat or Republican, and you are held to that choice during the primary election. In an open primary, you will have previously registered to vote, but during the election, the primary election, you are given the choice to participate in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary, although you cannot participate in both. There is also what is known as a blanket primary, a wide open primary, jungle primary, or a Cajun primary. Those are all terms for the same thing. In a blanket primary, what happens is all the individuals who desire the office, Democrat, Republican, third party, no party, all of them are placed on one ballot and citizens vote, and if somebody gets a majority, they are elected. If no one gets a majority, the top two individuals will face each other in a runoff, will face each other in the general election, and then the voters will decide who gets the office. It is possible in a blanket primary to have two Democrats facing each other or two Republicans facing each other. So typically what happens during a blanket primary is parties become less important, and there's also a moderating effect because the key to success in a blanket primary is to immediately appeal to a wide base as possible as opposed to simply the base of your party. Why does the United States have a two-party system? The simple answer is because of single-member district plurality election. In any single-member district election system, you tend to only have two parties. This can be contrasted with proportional representation, in where parties get seats in the national legislature in proportion to their strength nationwide. So if a country had 100 districts, and in every district, Party A got 55% of the vote, that would mean in an SMD system, all 100 seats in the national legislature would go to Party A. In a proportional representation system, you would not have individual districts, but rather membership in the national legislature would be allocated to parties based upon their proportional strength. So again, in that example, if a country had 100 seats in a national legislature and Party A got 55% of the votes, they would get 55 seats, and Party B would get the remaining seats. Another reason why there's only 2 political parties in the United States is because of what are called restrictive ballot access laws. Every state has a set of rules that determine who can get a line on the ballot. Now, independents immediately appear on the general election ballot, but if you want to have a party label by your candidate's name, then there are some rules that go along with that and some qualifications. And as previously stated, these voter queues are very important in helping your candidates get elected. So, many states require that your party get a certain percentage of an election to continue to have access to that party label, 5%, 10%, and it's very hard for minor parties to meet that threshold. This is not to say that third parties don't play a role in American politics. Third parties do perform a function, although winning contests will not be that function. Primarily what third parties do is they act as a safety valve, and what that means is they will bring up issues that have been ignored previously. Now, whenever this happens, what typically will be followed is one of the 2 major parties will adopt this issue and make it their own. The best example of this would be the Populist Party, which was relatively successful at getting its issues adopted, although it did not meet with large-scale electoral success. The final role of third parties, or the final effect of a third party, would be that they can act as a spoiler, effectively denying the election to a candidate that those voters would perhaps otherwise prefer.